Okay, I'm going to bring this Legal and Justice Systems Committee to order. It is May 10th at 11:30 a.m. Would like to start with a land acknowledgement statement. Before we begin, we acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Lummi, Nooksack, Samish, and Semiahmoo people who have cared for and tended this land since time immemorial. Truth acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage, difference, and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We pay respect to the elders, past and present. And please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us for uncovering such truths at any and all public events. Calling to order. The first item on the agenda is the meeting length. If we don't have a quorum, it's not something we can vote on, but we can discuss it a little bit. I have received responses from several members of the committee in the past about this topic. Although we tend to run out of time in a lot of our meetings because we've got a lot of stuff to talk about that's important. So we did shorten our time, but I'm wondering if we needed to go back. The concern is that—
Elaine, can you hear me?
I can hear you. The concern is that many of the members of this committee have other jobs, have other duties, other places to go. And if we extend time for legal and justice, would we eliminate having some people to be able to participate that are of value to this group? Is there any other discussion on this matter at this time? I see no hands. I see people are being very quiet.
Hi, this is Maya. Sorry, I'm home working, quarantining with COVID right now.
Sorry.
I think we would need to have more of the members here to have a meaningful discussion about this.
Thank you, Maya. I kind of agree with you. I know I had other members concerned about lengthening the meeting, so we can move on from that. Something that was brought up at the last steering committee, and Jill might be able to advise me if this is something that we can do now, or if we actually have to table it and vote at the next incarceration task force. So it was brought up to me about the land acknowledgement statement. We don't want to remove the land acknowledgement statement from our agendas, but do we need to read it, the whole thing? It does go into the time of some of the other topics. So if we just take a quick moment of silence, if that's something that's acceptable. And Jill, is that something that we have to vote on as the full task force, or is that something that would be just brought to the small committees?
No, it's up to the discretion of the chair.
Chief Tanksley?
Yes, I would suggest to continue reading the land acknowledgement. I think it's very important. I think it takes about, I haven't timed it, but I'm assuming about a minute. I do think though, what's meaningful for me is that perhaps we could pre-select who's going to read that. But I think it means a lot.
Thank you, Chief. Any other comments or discussion on that?
I agree with Chief Teasley. Thank you.
Excellent. Maybe we can roundtable and let somebody else read it every once in a while. I do agree it's important. We don't want to remove it. Thank you. Stephen, or are you just coming on?
I'm just coming on.
Excellent. Thank you.
I will note for the record that we do have a quorum now.
Excellent. We briefly discussed, Stephen, and for those that just came on, the regular meeting lengths. I think we're going to table that item until we have more members at this point. But I haven't heard any other comments on that, so I think that's where we're gonna leave that. The next agenda item is the 2022 annual report to County Council Executive. The draft and the annual report was mailed to everyone yesterday. Is there any missing topics that we need to discuss? And does anybody from the Legal and Justice Committee have ideas on what should be included in the what's next section? Sorry. Arlene? You're muted.
I've been working on the section on re-entry, so there's quite a lot of details of suggestions for what we need to do in the future in my writing. I haven't typed it up yet, and when I do, it'll go out to everybody to take a look at. But there's quite a few clear, specific suggestions in the list.
Thank you, Arlene. Anybody else that has any comments or ideas that we need to include in the report? We're just moving right along. Oh, Arlene again?
Yeah, I just remembered, one of the things I did was I contacted the person who had previously been in charge of some of the reentry training that is from the Goodwill system. And this is an older woman who has worked as a volunteer for a long time and still is doing it. But she withdrew when COVID started, which is, of course, one of the big disruptors in everything that we're talking about. What she said to me is that she's willing to do some more of this reentry work, for example, for job training. But she's willing to do it over, just to do it telephonically, and for small groups, like say a group of 4 or something like that. So she's willing to step back in, but just in a sort of not a face-to-face.
Thank you for that information, Arlene. Stephen and then Jackie.
Well, I just noticed at least my copy of the section on the annual report has nothing for next steps. So I wondered if we were going to talk about that this morning.
Yes, that is, what do we want to do for the next steps is on the questions for this agenda.
Sorry.
Nope, that's all good. Thanks. Jackie?
Yeah, there's just a mistake that needs correction under jail reentry. It says Lifeline is now the reentry contractor. It should say behavioral health reentry contractor, because they don't broadly do other reentry services. So let's see. Yeah, I think that would work.
Thank you, Jackie.
That's important, because who is doing SUD? Is there anyone doing that?
Well, we do have an agency coming in to do SUD assessments. There's no room in the jail to provide treatment, as you know. So we have kind of the best of both worlds, I guess, when it comes to lack of space, because we have Pioneer Human Services coming in to do conduct SUD assessments, and then they connect with the reentry person to be able to conduct the assessment, and then they will do the treatment coordination for the person going into treatment. So yeah, it works pretty well. They've been experiencing a low volume of referrals, and I don't know what that's about. I've been trying to investigate that.
Thanks, Jackie. Maya?
I know we could use for mental health assessments and reentry stuff, like we have the new mental health sentencing alternative option available, which is new, and we don't really have adequate support for the psychiatric evaluations that are necessary for that and the resources in the community to link people to. So I met with Wendy Jones recently to talk about that. She's very interested in trying to get evaluator who's dedicated to the mental health sentencing alternative. In terms of like future steps, I just would always like to say that like vigorous support for funding for public defenders and adequate public defenders and social workers in our office, behavioral health specialists in our office is something I think is relevant to this project. Thanks.
Thank you, Maya. I think that's definitely something we need to look at for the next steps. It's also something that was brought up by the competency and restoration topics that we discussed at the last meeting on trying to have somebody designated to our area for psychiatric services for those that had mental health issues. So I think that's something we want to invest more time and energy in. My question for Maya and Eric, and maybe Judge Garrett could chime in on this, is it was mentioned by Wendy too, whether or not there's a way that we can fast track some of the mental health cases on individuals that have just been restored, rather than those cases seem to lag out, and then sometimes we have to go back to the restoration processes. Is there any way that we could line that up so those cases are heard right away once we've got information of restoration?
Well, and they are heard right away in the sense that they're brought back to court and that the stays, that any sort of stays on the case are lifted and the case has to proceed under like speedy trial and everything. But I mean, what we could come back to is, the defense attorney is essentially meeting their client for the first time when they're restored and finally in a position to have a meaningful conversation about the case. So the case is beginning right then after months and months and months of restoration. But I think that like for instance, the new mental health sentencing alternative could be really a powerful tool. Working on these cases, but again, like my office is it was basically like an unfunded mandate. The DOC doesn't have the resources or ability to actually follow through and create the structure that's required for the sentencing alternative. And so my office we don't want our clients to miss out on the opportunity. So we're using resources that aren't really in the best for it, and we're just scrambling together to try to get together all of the things that have to be done for the alternative. So that's why I say like right now Lifeline is coming in to do evaluations for PACT, but they're not true psychiatric evaluations, and we don't have a provider really who's dedicated to that, and that I think could have a meaningful impact on trying to get folks out of jail and into programming in the community. I think that's a huge lack, but it's a new program, and yeah.
Maya, wouldn't you think that you would need intensive case management for someone who is restored? Wouldn't that be what the need is?
Well, are we talking about in custody folks?
Well, wherever they are, they need someone who's been in that severe of a psychological state, needs very careful follow-up and attendance. This is otherwise they'll slip back into whatever the problems were in the first place. So
Yeah.
this is a missing piece.
Yeah. I agree.
Jackie?
So I just wonder, Maya, who would be the best person? Could we get a presentation on the mental health sentencing alternative? Because I'm kind of new to hearing about it, and I wanted to hear more about how it works and what the components are. Would that be you or somebody from your office?
Sure, I guess, probably Eric and probably wants to have a prosecutor be part of that too. And I can put something together for this group. There's a lot, yes, I can do that. And I could work with somebody from Eric's office to do that.
Okay, yeah, that would be super helpful because I'm just trying to wrap my brain around it and figure out all the effects that it has and kind of where we need to look for resources.
Yeah, the statute is pretty clear if you read it. but I can kind of walk through the statute as needed.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful. I can read the statute, but I might not understand the impacts, and it's a lot of legal language that I'm not as familiar with as some people are. So it would be super helpful if we could get that. And I just wanted to add too, while I'm talking, that Lifeline Connections is applying for the Commerce grant that Stephen Gockley, it was Mark Gardner forwarded through Stephen Gockley for a reentry position and a couple of additional peer navigators or peer, I guess you'd call them peer navigators, but peers to help with warm handoffs for people leaving the jail. So just wanted you to know that. We have one reentry specialist now, and this would add one plus a couple of peers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And my recommendation for the number of staff, which partly comes from people who have worked in the system, is a minimum of 3 in terms of what we really need.
Thank you. Jackie, did you have more or you hand? Just checking. On a presentation for the mental health program assessments, is that something that you and Eric might be able to put together for the next meeting in June, or do you need a couple months?
I think, so what's the date of the next meeting in June?
Just a reminder, the June meeting is a joint meeting with the Behavioral Health Committee. So let me know, would you like to do the presentation at that meeting, at the joint meeting, which is scheduled for, hang on one second while I get my calendar, June 14th or July 12th is the
What
next.
time is, oh, the June, that's the 11:30. I think I could do that for the June 14th meeting.
Okay.
I think that makes a lot of sense because it is a crossover with behavioral health. So just seems like it makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
So yes.
Do you
if we
want,
could add that.
Eric, do you want me to work with someone in your office on this, or just show up and we'll answer questions?
So Maya, we can talk about it. I think that, I'll just tell you that I was the first one to do one of these cases to have heard before a judge. And I don't know, I have a little bit of knowledge about how they work. And I think there are some, I think you indicated that this was a real clear statute, but we had a lot of questions when we were doing it.
The other thing I'm wondering is if we can look for any grants or possibilities to fund a provider for our area in that. I don't know if it would be through the courts, through AOC, if they would have the BGA, or if you guys have any other ideas that we could look for that funding for this unfunded mandate, which we seem to get a lot of. All right, back to our annual report. Is there any other ideas on anything we want in the what's next section for this group? I'm going to move on to Judge Deborah Garrett on the pretrial processes work group, and that might be something that we may need to add to the next steps.
Well, I wondered about that, but I didn't speak up because I thought, oh, I'm next on the agenda. And so you were prescient there, Raylene. The COVID, excuse me, the COVID era is getting behind us now, but it had a big effect on pretrial release for many reasons. As you may recall, the pretrial release, pretrial services unit was established and began informally assessing individuals for appropriateness for pretrial release before the COVID pandemic hit. When the COVID pandemic hit, normal operations of the courts were suspended. And there were a series of directives from the Supreme Court, which essentially directed that our court release on a pretrial basis a big proportion of the defendants who were in jail pretrial. That included a lot of people that we would have released anyway, probably, based on the pretrial assessment tool that we were scheduled to begin using the day after the protocol, the pandemic hit, and the courts were shut down and we moved into the COVID area. So the court released a lot of people that it probably would have released anyway, also released a number of people that it might not have released anyway. And then from there, over the next 2 years, to summarize, painting with a really broad brush, defendants didn't come to court. That was frequently a problem. The court dealt with orders to get people into court. In extreme cases, it issued bench warrants. The court was trying its level best to keep defendants in the system without locking them up unnecessarily. In other words, putting people in jail only when it was absolutely necessary, because we were going to completely lose them otherwise. All of this was a problem, of course, because there simply was no way to conduct jury trials during the intensive COVID era. I can't tell you how many alternatives we explored, but ultimately it simply was not possible, on-site or off-site, to deal with all of the factors you have to deal with in a criminal jury trial, including social distancing of all the people in the courtroom, including the 12 jurors, and the security that has to, any facility that will allow that kind of social distancing doesn't have the proper setup for security in most cases. So there were countless issues. It was not for lack of effort by the court, but it was nearly impossible to conduct jury trials. We did conduct 1 or 2 in which the parties had agreed to a 6-person jury, but we could only accommodate 6 jurors, not 12. So there was this huge bottleneck. That is now easing as the court does begin to conduct jury trials now. So the court is going back to a more normal situation in terms of the predictability of trial potential. Also, the Supreme Court orders have been, as I understand it, and I'm no longer on the court, I'm retired, Judge Garrett now. But as I understand it, the Supreme Court directives regarding releasing virtually everyone, except for the really serious dangers to the community, have eased as well. So the pretrial, what the pretrial services unit does is it screens defendants for their records and for a series of qualities that will be important to the judge that's assessing whether or not a defendant should be released pretrial. And this is done as a substitute for or in addition to any bail that might be assigned. The idea is to give people who don't have the financial means for bail a fair assessment on releasability before trial. And the court is slowly being able to get back to that model. The next step is for us to compile statistics about how we've done, who we've released, and of the people that we've released, how many of them have been charged with new criminal offenses, how many of them have failed to appear for their hearings. The court has significantly reduced the number of in-person court appearances that defendants are required to do. That helps a lot as well. But the pretrial services unit doesn't have a sort of normal time span to look back on in terms of compiling its statistics. the unit and our committee works with a demographic statistician, Dr. Andrew Peterson, who is charged with assessing all of our pretrial services criteria to assure that certain things are true, that they don't discriminate or treat differently any particular group of people on any basis other than propensity to commit a serious crime or disappear from the system. Also, we need to look at the statistics of whether the people that are being released are committing new crimes, and if they are, who are the people that are committing new crimes? Which criteria on our list of criteria seem to indicate a higher propensity for committing new crimes? That requires a track record that we don't have at this point, but that we're once again developing. And so Dr. Peterson is working with Dave Reynolds, our court administrator, and with the two officers on the pretrial services unit to compile that information. And that'll be done on an ongoing basis so that we can continue to assess how our criteria, how relevant our criteria are, and whether they need to be fine-tuned. And the process of assessing people for pretrial release is an ongoing process. It's not something that you set in place and then figure you've got the criteria set in stone and forget about. Instead, you have to keep going back to the numbers that indicate how many defendants are being released. Are there more people that could be released? Of the people who are being released, are they being successful? Successful meaning that they remain responsive to the court's orders and they don't commit new crimes. And if so, let's focus on releasing the people who who meet the criteria, been shown to be successful, to result in successful defendants. So we don't have a lot of specific information to give this committee or the task force right now. But the good news is that things are getting back on track, and getting that information, which has been an ongoing process, is resuming. So that's my report. And I see Eric, Maya, and Stephen all present. And if you'd like to add, go right ahead. Thanks.
The only thing I would add to what I think was an excellent report from Judge Garrett was that in keeping with her point that this is an ongoing process and that we will be evaluating data as we gather it, really thanks to Judge Garrett's ongoing leadership on this, we've recruited both Damani Johnson and Adam Fryer, a case manager from the LEAD program, both people of color, both involved and sensitive to racial equity issues, to work with us on assessing the data that we gather and make sure that we are maintaining or improving the racial equity that we see in those statistics. So Adam and Damani have met with us several times. They're starting to attend pretrial processes workgroup meetings, and they will be sitting down with us when we have sufficient data to analyze and make adjustments from to help us assess what steps we should take in those regards. That's the only point I would add to Judge Garrett's report.
Thank you so much, Stephen and Judge Garrett. That was wonderful. One of the questions I have on the data and statistics, you said you were looking to see on how many people reoffended with this program. What I'm wondering is if there is somebody's released on pretrial from a felony level, if the statistics are also monitoring whether there are any conditions, if that person has a misdemeanor charge out of court of limited jurisdiction. Are we tracking reoffense with somebody that might be on conditions from one court to the felony level?
You know, I feel like I should know the answer to this for sure. My understanding is that yes, we are. And that the pretrial services officers, that's one of their responsibilities, is to check regularly for people who are on pretrial services. So I believe that's the case, but I'm going to confirm that and let you know rather than going with my belief, unless Eric or Maya can answer with any more definitiveness than I have.
I guess,
Okay, Raylene, I'm going to get the answer to that and I'll let you know. I'll also let Jill and Jackie know so that it can be reflected in the minutes of today's meeting or in follow-up.
thank you so much. And then is there anything else that this group can do to help with statistics or data? And is that something that's being shared with the Justice Project Data Group or the Index Committee?
Stephen can chime in if I say something wrong, but based on my memory, when the Index Committee was founded, it was agreed that we would share statistics with them. The statistics that we've had, however, aren't representative of, quote, normal times because of the lack of trials. So I don't know if they were shared with the Index Committee, but if they were of limited help.
Yeah, and I would just elaborate a touch. The other thing, besides the conduct of jury trials and the whole case processing difficulties that COVID imposed on the system, again, with Judge Garrett's leadership, the pretrial services unit was intended to provide sort of tiers of monitoring depending on the scoring of the risk assessment instrument. And with COVID, they really haven't been able to do that. Literally, they've been able to give text reminders of upcoming hearings and phone check-ins on some periodic basis. There are more intense, still not super intense, but more intense levels of monitoring that could go on if somebody had a higher risk score, but was released nonetheless with those conditions. So the FTA data and the new crime data are all worse than they would be if we had a fully operable pretrial services monitoring system as well. So when we get all the pieces humming along, we'll have more reliable data to feed in. But I know that Caleb is ready to work with the pretrial data that we come up with once it's something that we can put some credence in.
Thank you. Is there any other questions for Judge Garrett or on the pretrial services group?
Okay, well, thank you all.
Thank you so much, Judge Garrett. Seeing no other questions on that, we're going to move right on into the behavioral health and law enforcement co-response in the county. As some members are not able to be present, I believe Eric Ritchie was labeled to assist on this. Are you able to help us out, Eric?
I was asked to answer a question. I can do that.
Thank you.
So the question I was asked was from a citizen asking about, do we need to change the law to add an alternative response team member with the officers who go out and investigate a crime? And the short answer is I don't believe so. The laws that were referred to were 1310, which was modified by 2037. Basically officers' use of force, and both of those laws talk about what officers can do, but provides limits upon them. Doesn't talk about anything involving an alternative response team. And because of that, I don't think that they make any sort of obligations on officers or the alternative response team. The other law that was referred to was 1054, and that is talking about tactics for law enforcement. 1054 and 1310 are from 2021. 2037 came from 2022. 1054, the tactics, again, nothing talks about the alternative response team or places any additional obligations on law enforcement for such thing. And I don't think that that needs to be a change to form an alternative response team either. So essentially, I don't think those laws need to be changed to create an alternative response team for the sheriff's office.
I think I would also add that as of yesterday, Senate Bill 5644 went into effect. And essentially the title of that bill is Behavioral Health Co-Response Services Best Practices. And that, again, that's Senate Bill 5644. And essentially what that bill outlines is that there's a mandate for law enforcement. And in fact, I'll just read it. It says the purpose of this act is to develop best practices and recommendations and a model training curriculum to first responders and behavioral health professionals working on co-response teams to create ongoing learning opportunities for emerging and established co-response programs. So that bill just went into effect yesterday. And I think to answer the citizen's question, perhaps maybe we should lean on this new law to dig into that to see how it might assist us here in Whatcom County.
Thank you, Chief Tank. Stephen?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I guess, mainly by way of question to Eric and Chief Tank. Under Sheriff Doug Chadwick has reported to the Behavioral Health Committee about a pretty promising pilot project in Skagit County, a co-responder, sometimes ride along, sometimes not ride along program that he hoped to develop an analog to here for the sheriff's office in outlying areas. Skagit County effectively serves their East County area like Hamilton and so forth with this program. Have there been any further discussions that you're aware of on piloting that here?
No.
And I don't have any information. In fact, I haven't seen the plan. So it would be helpful if we could see the plan or at least the preliminary plan.
Maybe we could make a note for the joint meeting in June to see if Doug would update both groups on that possibility.
The Response Systems Division is very involved in that. They'll be providing the mental health alternative response to that team or co-responder with the sheriff's office. So I'll look into that as well and see what I can dig up. I know they're well involved in the design of it. So I don't know if they're at a point where they have a plan that could be presented or not, but certainly somebody could talk to it.
Great, thank you, Jackie.
Thank you. Is there any other questions or comments in reference to this co-response? Hearing none, I'm going to move on to the GARE and racial equity implementation in legal and justice systems. I'd like to ask how are committee members using GARE and or addressing racial equity issues within their agency? Anybody want to chime in?
I guess I'll chime in. Here at the Blaine Police Department, we are, in fact, in the city of Blaine, we have not collectively adopted the GARE tool. However, that's a conversation that we need to have. With regard to the police department, we do foster some of the principles of GARE, but it's not official. For example, one of the principles is community engagement. And here at the Blaine Police Department, when we do our hiring and our promotional boards, Traditionally, the members of the promotional board have just been people throughout law enforcement, but in the last 2 years, we've added community members and non-law enforcement personnel to our promotional and hiring boards to get that outside perspective. So in terms of actually incorporating the entire toolkit, no, but some principles, yes.
Thank you. Maya?
Very frequent emails from GARE, probably daily. Honestly, I don't look closely at them. I don't, there's no, I mean, I'm glad we're members, but I just don't feel like there's any meaningful implementation of it into my department. And it's like they gave us, like, they're like, sign up for these emails, and I get them, but it doesn't seem very effective or meaningful. I guess I'd like more direction on how to use it, and that's all I got.
So I think Maya's comments are really good. I can tell you that I was part of the group that worked on the process of getting GARE into the county, and I don't feel like we've been presented with a good method for implementing GARE into the decisions that we make. With that said, I can tell you that the prosecutor's office has been working real hard by changing hiring practices, making it more intentional being that we send out information to minority minority bar association throughout the state to let them know that we are hiring because we are interested in diversity. We make that very clear in our notifications. So we do that in our hiring, and I can tell you that when we're making decisions as far as charging, making decisions as far as plea negotiations, we think about issues of race. These are things that we're concerned about, that we have a lot of discretion, and we want to make sure that we're doing things for the right reasons. So we think about these things and as prosecutors, and all those everything that we do regarding that. But I think Maya's point should be well taken. I think that this group, if we were to do anything regarding GARE, we should indicate to the administration that providing some more details about how to implement the program within our agencies would be a good idea.
Thank you. Stephen, and then Arlene.
I'll just recount what I thought was an interesting exchange at last week's Task Force Steering Committee meeting, which Executive Sadhu attended. And he explained his pathway, GARE pathway, which would culminate in the passage of a racial equity ordinance that implemented GARE principles. And I think we all, or most of us, probably heard Jed Holmes articulate that there's a group forming within county government for this. But we also all know how a government as large as our county government works, and the speed at which it works, which is really not up to snuff for our interest in this area. And so what I said to Executive Sadhu, and I'll say to us, is I think the ball is in our court as a task force. And I'm very encouraged by Maya's and Eric's comments that you and Chief Tanksley as well, that you are within your own agencies taking independent steps to further those principles. And I think the task force needs to do the same thing. We're not really beholden to a long-term timetable that the county government as a whole may implement. That would be great. And when it gets to the end, I think that'll be a good thing. But in the meantime, we can do a whole lot with the racial equity toolkit or GARE resources on our own. And I think we ought to look for those steps. I agree with Maya. Jill has started circulating some of those email resources, which mostly are queries for help from other jurisdictions rather than help from other jurisdictions. So I think really the onus is on us to make something of this, and the sooner the better, in my opinion.
Thank you, Stephen. I know with the courts, there's a Gender and Justice Commission that provides a lot of information and education to court staff as well as judges on how we can better implement racial equity as well as gender equity. Something that was brought up a while back, and I've seen, we're trying to make sure that people that can't afford to get civil protection orders, I think there was recently a law passed that allowed no fees to be assessed on some of the filing fees so that those things could move forward. Other issues that we see in our court and criminal wise is that we have individuals that need to come to court that don't have childcare. And that stretches across all barriers, I think racial as well as poverty guidelines. I don't know how we would implement it and if this is part of the GARE program, if I'm in the right path, but to try to somehow get childcare for those that need to attend court, because the children sometimes interrupt court proceedings for other individuals, but some people don't have a place to bring their kids when they have to go, whether it's civil or criminal. Any thoughts on that? Eric, do you and Maya see children being brought into court on a regular basis?
Absolutely. I mean, it used to be more so prior to the pandemic, but absolutely, we had people bringing their children. I'll stop there.
It's not a lot, I'll say. I mean, in Superior Court, but then again, like people are a lot of people are appearing remotely and in different fashions. And I think that, Zoom appearances kind of makes this way less of an issue. I mean, people have some required appearances, but it's like arraignment and trial, and that's it. So, I mean, presumably they will have childcare for their kids at a Superior Court felony trial. I don't really think that. So I think as long as the rules remain like they are, a district court's a different creature, and and they are allowing Zoom still appearances, I believe. So yeah, I don't know. I think the landscape is different than it was before.
Right. So I think, again, to build off of what Maya said, I think one thing that this group could do to help with these issues is to make sure that our courts understand how important it is to continue a Zoom court alternative. It's as far as access to justice goes, it's been very helpful for people. And I know that there's been some talk about removing the Zoom alternative. And I think that's a mistake. I think we need to keep that open for people.
Raylene, you legitimately asked about the link between GARE considerations and the childcare resource question. I think one of the roadblocks we're going to hit in applying the racial equity toolkit is it turns us every time to what data exists to determine those inequities. And I suspect we have zero data on that question. I'm just wondering whether there's a way amongst court administrators that you could even informally try to,
In a meeting.
try to total, who's experiencing that problem with lack of childcare or interference with court proceedings by the presence of children. And so that we could see if it is disproportionately affecting people of color, and that would clearly make it a racial equity issue to address, perhaps.
Thank you, Stephen. I think it would be a difficult task to gather the data on that. I mean, we get phone calls on a regular basis. I need to continue my case. I don't have childcare. I don't have, and then going to Eric's point and Maya on the Zoom, things are different, and we're doing more Zoom hearings than we have in the past. And I think that definitely helps out with individuals that don't have childcare. So I think there's some benefits there. I can talk to some of the other court administrators to see if they have any ideas on gathering that data. I don't know how we would, other than just hand documenting cases, I don't know how we would be able to put that data together, because there's not really anything that would go into the judicial information system.
And I was assuming it might have to be a hand data kind of thing, which would be better than zero.
Yeah,
But burdensome, understandable.
I'll look into it and see what we can come up with, but I can't guarantee anything. On the Zoom hearings, I think for some of the smaller jurisdictions, they don't have quite the technology or capacity to do some of the Zoom hearings. They're trying, but it has been a little bit of a struggle. We just went hybrid with council, and so we're adopting that for the Blaine Municipal Court so that we can do more Zoom. Kind of going back to COVID and off of GARE, I'm seeing an uptick in COVID cases. I've had attorneys and clerks recently advise me of illnesses that they're not able to be in court. So I've got actually 3 Zoom hearings tomorrow due to the uptick in COVID. I hope that's not a bad omen, but we are seeing more individuals. So I think the Zoom thing is going to have to continue for quite some time. And I don't think we want it to go away, because I think it does help for equal access to justice for all. Thank you. Oh, Maya?
I'd be curious what departments in the county are effectively incorporating GARE, and I don't know who is sort of guiding it through our county departments, but maybe they could arrange a meeting and we could confer about it, because I hate to see it something we're paying for. It's a resource and it's not getting used very well.
Stephen, do you think Mike Parker would be able to help out with that?
Yes, I think Mike might be able to help. And Jill, can you come on? Because I know you're in contact with some of the internal efforts. And maybe you could update us on what's going on there. I know you had a hand with boards and commissions and the assignment to the health department.
Yes, so what I know about current efforts is, number one, what Stephen mentioned about Executive Sadhu's comments at steering committee last week about his plan for codifying some processes for all county departments. That I'm sure is a process. I don't know how long that will take. I don't know what his timeline is. It's something he says that he plans to do. For all county boards and commissions, I'm eagerly awaiting the formation of the Racial Equity Commission. I have quite the to-do list to work with them once they get up and running and get going. So that's another step that we're still waiting to finish. And then as far as the task force is concerned, as you know, Stephen, you and I and Mike Parker have met a couple of times and are brainstorming some strategies that we can implement for the task force. That's still a process that we're working on. And I think that will probably, hopefully, Stephen, correct me, but I'm hoping that sometime by the end of this summer, we might have some good changes for the task force and some things that we can implement.
Thank you. Is there any more comments or questions on the GARE implementation of legal and justice? Arlene? You're muted.
I like to get periodic reminders, simple, clear reminders to sort of stay on task, because we're doing something different, we're changing. And when you try to change, it's really difficult to stay on that new track. But for me, the one little saying that's stuck in my mind that I've read is the question, who does this help and who does this hurt? That evaluative question somehow is sticking with me, and I'm trying to use it in decision-making. And I think that's a help in the step towards change.
Thank you, Arlene. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'm going to move right along because we're running out of time. The Justice Project Data Work Group, I was hoping Caleb would be able to assist us, but he is not here today. Stephen might have some information on it. What I was looking for is there data or information that they're gathering that we could assist with in different areas? And I had some questions about it. I did get a link. Jill sent it to me from Wendy in reference to their last meeting. Is there any questions or any comments on that, or do we want to table this item until Caleb's available to give us more information?
There are sort of two separate data tracks going on in the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. One is the criminal legal track, which made a presentation at the last SAC meeting, the second of the SAC meetings. And I think that's probably what you got a link to, Raylene. That was a fire hose of data that they continue to work on and try to tailor and make useful. Coming up on June 8th is the third SAC meeting, which will have behavioral health data reported. And there's a really high functioning group assembled that's working on that. And Jackie may be able to report on the status of that because she's one of the organizing members of that. And so what the overlap will be with the criminal legal data, I'm not sure. And we'll probably talk about the two streams at the fourth meeting of the SAC. But Jackie, do you have anything you can report on the behavioral health data team?
I'm trying to figure out what you're talking about. The behavioral health data team. What did I talk to you about that I'm not remembering? Oops, you're on mute.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Yes, the group that Perry sort of assembled that you're part of, that's looking at behavioral health data and will report to the SAC.
Oh,
meeting.
gotcha. Well, it's a little bit different because that is more about a gap analysis. So we're analyzing the gaps between the intercepts, for those of you that are familiar with the sequential intercept model and the continuum of criminal justice sort of phases. And so that's what we've been doing, working on analyzing the gaps and determining what they are and in between behavioral health and the criminal justice system. And that will come as a report to the SAC on, I think it's June 5th, I want to say, something like that. So that was a body of work that Barry Buchanan wanted the health department to engage in, and we've been pretty involved with it in the past, so it seemed to make sense to go ahead and work on it. So we got input from various providers in the community and from and then kind of are homing in on specific programs that we think are most needed and prioritizing those programs. And again, that will be the presentation to the SAC. Does that make sense? Is that what you're talking about? Okay.
Yes. And so, Raylene, I think in answer to your question about the data relevant to this committee itself, probably what you saw there in that presentation is what we have at this point. It would have been great if Caleb could update us, but I'm not aware that he would have a lot to update us on.
I briefly spoke with Caleb last week, Tuesday, at the jail, and he had mentioned that he was looking for different areas, but he was going to probably meet with some of the police departments in the small cities. He asked me if I could assist him with some warrant data, so I sent him a spreadsheet that I created through the BIT program with AOC and told him I could do more with it if he wanted, and it was just warrants across the board. But he had to give me the specifics on what he wanted in order for me to create the program. So I just want to make sure that he's getting all the help that he needs, and that once we get this program moving, that it doesn't die, that we continue to fund and have resources available to get accurate data in the future from before and forward, moving forward. Thank you. Is there any other questions or comments on that? I think we're going to have Caleb speak on it if we want more information.
Well, my last comment on this, Raylene, is that you'll see on the draft agenda for next Monday's task force meeting that one of the questions we're going to take up is whether we want to make any recommendations for the coming budget proposal. And one of the suggestions was the possibility of contracting for some data assistance to build on the work that Caleb and Perry's and Jackie's data teams have been doing for SAC in a way that would benefit the task force's data development and the across the system kind of data coordination that we've all noted for years is lacking. So give a little bit of thought to that, and we'll be talking about that Monday morning.
Thank you, Stephen. It looks like we're running out of time. We've got agenda items for the June joint meeting. I believe with the help of Maya and Eric, we've got an item from the Legal and Justice that would be beneficial to it. Is there anything else quick that anybody wants to add to that? All right, do we have any other business or public comment?
There's one person attending the meeting today. If you'd like to speak to the committee, please virtually raise your hands now. No hands are raised.
Excellent. Thank you for all of the support and input for today's meeting. I will call this meeting adjourned. See you on Monday.